because they'll walk across your keyboard. Just things like that. So if we're going in order of what we have, Claudius, would you like to start us off? And I think, how much time do we have for this, Tony?
I think we were aiming for keep within 10 minutes so that allows for some questions at the end, I think.
Okay, sure. So if you each just, we'll give you some kind of a signal. I don't know how we do that, but I'll leave that up to Tony. He can hold up a flag or something,
Yep.
and just to give us the general overview, and then we'll carry that on into a discussion later on. Hi, Marianne. How are you? We're at full capacity. Okay, please take it away, Claudius.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen, start my timer so I can make sure I'm on track. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon at this writing retreat. And of course, the opinions expressed are my own, nobody else's. So I figure I should have that disclaimer there. And I felt I should introduce myself this way. Hi, I'm Claudius, and I'm a former EdD student. I can't stand up and say that, but there we go. But seriously, I started the program in 2012, and 5.5 years later, I defended, completed minor revisions, and then graduated in November of 2018. So I'm done. But we were asked to talk about things that helped and hindered us and how we navigated the program. So I wanted to start with hindrances, because hindrances are important to recognize as they can become distractions. And I wanted to start with these also so I can end on a positive note. So one of the first things that is a hindrance are attitudes. So things like self-doubt. Maybe questions like, what do they think of me? This idea of imposter syndrome. So I don't belong here. So I'll give you an example. I was probably the unintended recipient of a piece of communication that included a comment by somebody important to the process, doubting my capacity to do my research. So can you imagine the effect that that uncontextualized comment had on me? I'll return to that later. And again, there's some echoes with what has been spoken of previously, so look for those connections, and these were not intended. Unclear feedback or unhelpful feedback, or no useful feedback during the coursework. So I'm looking at this from a systems approach where everything ties to each other. So I looked at coursework as bits and pieces of writing to help me ultimately with my dissertation. And when I didn't get helpful feedback, I found that to be a hindrance to me. Disconnection between on-campus sections, so between the times that we were on campus. And I found that to be those breaks in what I consider to be a continuum of learning were very distracting and very unproductive. When I got to the writing component, writing up the dissertation and proposal, the committee was sometimes incommunicado, and for various reasons, but when I couldn't make any progress or get feedback, I found that to be somewhat of a slowing of the process. And of course, inevitably, work and teaching and life do get in the way, and they each presented their own complexities. And as I get into the helps, you'll see how these connect. And another hindrance was this lack of a UBC network, so no community of inquiry that I could be a part of. I don't live in Vancouver, I live in Winnipeg, so I was distanced in more ways than one, so physically and conceptually. So how did I deal with these, and what did I learn upon reflection? Because some of these things, as you're going through it, or as I was going through it, they were only a learning experience afterwards. So creating my own personal networks, connecting with faculty, so other than instructors, but the personal networks, I work at an educational institution, I'm connected to several educational institutions, so I was able to build my own network of instructors and faculty, like-minded people, who could comment on my research. We could have conversations. And so this lack of a UBC-centric network, I offset by having my own personal networks. Connecting with faculty at UBC, so other than my direct instructors, was helpful because then I can connect with people when I was on campus about research that they were doing that was similar to mine or copacetic with mine. And I found that to be helpful to my writing process. Institutes, of course, helped energize. We could discuss how we were doing, what we were finding to be blockages, where our stuck places were. And I found that those institutes to be helpful for that. When I was on campus, and again, this looking at this ability to focus, treating residencies like a work day, so starting at 7:30, ending at 4:30 or 5 o'clock or whatever, helped me to focus, helped me to block off that time when I knew what I was doing. A strategically chosen committee. I chose my committee early, and I had a specific reason for choosing each individual member of my committee. And it helped me anyway later on when I had to take advice from them, remembering, oh yeah, I chose them because I wanted that advice or I wanted that characteristic that they brought. So I found that was helpful. And then once I got to the writing process, building some tools for communicating with the committee, making it easy for them. And here's an example of a tool, making it easy for the committee to give me feedback, for me to give them feedback, for them to see my responses to their feedback. And this made the process very effective and efficient. The revision process can sometimes be messy. It became transparent and efficient for all involved. So what about ignoring those distractions? Well, when I was on campus using the EdD office, I'm not sure if that still exists in the same way, but back in Pond, whatever it was, on campus, having that cloistered space where I could close the door and block out distractions or open the door a little bit and welcome distractions, depending on how I was feeling. Setting realistic expectations, so time-wise, during the summers and the year. What could I realistically do given everything else that was going on in my life? Using those distracted moments as mental breaks. Going for a walk, perhaps. Going and just clearing my mind or doing whatever, but always keeping the dissertation on my mind. I was always thinking about what I was going to write, what I had just written, what I should write. But again, making use of even those distractions. And I have weird thoughts that occur to me throughout the process. So keeping a scratch pad for those good but distracting ideas. So things about future research, other themes, really good random thoughts that occurred to me. Acknowledging the distraction. You're going to be distracted, and those distractions may be important. So look at why you're distracted, deal with it, and get back to writing. Make room for those distractions, in other words. So what tips do I have? Well, be assertive, but respectfully assertive. You are a part of your committee's work. You're not a side job, but you also have obligations. Keep asking for answers when you don't find the answer the first time you ask a question. Be realistic. Don't overpromise. Don't say I'm going to get a chapter done and then not do it continuously. Right? Stuff happens, but make sure you're diligent, deliver what you promise, work to deadlines, but be honest. When something's not working out, let your committee know. Ask good questions. Don't assume the committee can read your mind, and don't assume you know what your committee thinks. So thinking back to that piece of communication I got where I saw a comment from a committee member about me, I clarified it with them in a roundabout way, but figured out what it was and then moved on and was able to get over that. Do a directed readings course. Ed Studies 580 helps you write towards your dissertation, so you can write to smaller pieces. And that ties in nicely with this idea of writing small. Don't try to write paragraphs or chapters necessarily, but craft those really good sentences that clarify. Read for construct, not just content. Meaning, read other dissertations, see how other people craft their ideas and see what you can take from there. An important one is be humble. Listen to your committee. You chose them. Listen to them. But be confident. You are the researcher. Stand up for what you believe, as Deirdre had alluded to earlier, and stand up for what you've written, but be humble. It will help you when you defend. So that was my 10 minutes. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
That's your alarm going off, Claudius. Thank you.
Yes.
Very well and very good words. Just to answer your question, unfortunately, we no longer have an EDD office. It went when we left Ponderosa. In Ponderosa G, we had an office set aside that had a computer and printer and everything that was needed, so that when students came in from out of town to take their classes in the summer, they had an office that they could go to. And they would just reserve it with one of our staff members at that time, and they could go into that office and they could use that office as long as they were there. When we moved into Ponderosa Commons, we were promised that we would have an office again specifically for the EDD office. But unfortunately, what happened is there was a lobbying to have the dean join our department, which he did. He then got the office that was the EDD office. And so it disappeared from our possession. So we can't offer that. But there are some spaces in Ponderosa Commons where people can, book time to go in, and do what we had, envisioned with the EDD office in Ponderosa at that time. Tony, what's your preference in terms of questions? Should we have a few minutes for questions now and then have a broad discussion at the end? Because people may want to just ask Claudia some specific questions right now.
Yeah, we might just have to keep a lid on it for the time so that it doesn't blow out too much. But I think keep them pertinent right now as it occurs to people. It's quite a good point. I think we can go with a couple if you've got some there.
Okay, I'm looking in the chat and we have lots of good comments, but we don't have questions at the moment, which is fine.
Jeannie, then.
Yeah, we can then move on to Jeannie, and what we'll do is we'll have a roundup at the end and we'll come back, Claudius. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, great. I guess it's me next. And I am not going to be as succinct, I don't think, as Claudius was. He was amazing. But what I'll do is I will, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I went from a different way, and I'm talking about my journey, which was a long, not so long story, but I'm just going to try to focus on everything that sort of happened along the way from a slightly different perspectives, but there is some common themes here with what Claudius said. So in the beginning, I was on a mission. 3 years, woo, I'm going to get this done. Started in the summer when, you know what, it was great because I didn't have any other distractions. I was on campus and it was great. And I thought, oh, this is great, lots of time. I'm capable. I'm going to get it done in 3 years. Unrealistic. That was an unrealistic goal right from day one. And the reason why is because when I got back to reality, full-time job, and I had a job change in the fall. I moved from being an instructor at an institution to the dean. I was acting dean or an interim dean for a bit, and it required a lot of focus, a lot of responsibility, and it took away from my ability to focus on my studies. But because we were doing coursework at the time with deadlines, it was a reasonable opportunity for me to get things done because there was deadlines. I had to meet those, and it kept me on track. Of course, life got in the way, as Claudius mentioned. My father died, my kids needed me, work was piling up all over the place. My house was a mess. I had a pet that died. I had to deal with life while meeting those deadlines. And because the deadlines were there, I think I was able to do it. Okay, the next step of the process was the courses were complete, and now it was time to prepare for the comprehensive exam. Well, that was stressful. And what did Jeannie do? She read and read and read and read and didn't write. I just wanted to read all the time. And then I did finally get something together, and I submitted it. And then as soon as I submitted it, I went back to reading again. And what that did was it got me more panicked. And then I revisited my comprehensive submission and updated it and resubmitted it again. And then I panicked while I waited and I forgot to write. So what did I learn from that? Well, I need to trust in myself, but I have to write more often. I had this idea in my head that I could just go and read everything. And because I knew that I was an okay writer, that I could write and not worry about it. I'll just get all my information together and then I'll do a sit down and write it. And as again, Claudius pointed out, don't tell yourself you're going to write a chapter in a day or 2 days or a week, because it takes time to reflect. It takes time to circle back. It takes time to think. It takes time to renew some ideas and get new ideas. So it was that kind of process that was sort of missing in the beginning. Of course, then we had the comprehensive exam, and I chose to go first. We got to volunteer. And the reason why I did that is I needed to get it out of the way because I was getting stressed out. The whole thing was stressing me. Again, there was some uncertainties, some imposter syndrome, some belief I couldn't do it. And of course, as soon as I presented, then the questions came from the faculty at UBC, and I was kind of like, oh my God, am I going to be able to answer these? I was afraid. I was, trying to just get through it. And then, of course, I refer to this as the authorities. Then the authorities went to talk, and I called them the authorities because it reminded me of the cat diaries and dog diaries. If any of you have ever listened to them on YouTube, they're hilarious. But they went off after the presentation, and just the students were there, and it was really nerve-wracking. But they didn't come back with an answer as to whether the presentation would suffice or not. So again, it's the panicking, the waiting. And while I was doing that, I wasn't writing. I was reading some more. So why should I be panicked? Shouldn't I trust in myself? Again, I can write, so I don't need to write, correct? Well, then it came time to the proposal. And what did I do? I read and read and read some more. Meanwhile, my house was getting full of papers and books and articles, and you name it, I had it all over the place. I finally sat down and wrote the proposal. And again, I figured, okay, I can just sit down and do this because I can write. I'm not worried about that. And to my surprise, it wasn't a good job the first time. So I had to tweak it and read some more and tweak it and write some more and tweak it and read some more. And that went on for a few months. And this is why the writing on the daily is so important, because it does not work to sit down and try to write huge amounts at one time. Sometimes you might be on a little bit of a flow, but normally take your supervisor's advice, take your committee's advice, do little bits at a time. And then look at this title. This is what happened next. Read, collect data, read, analyze, read, write, reflect, write. That was the process for the next 5 bleeping years. It took me 8 years to get through this process. Unlike my colleague Claudius and the other 2 colleagues that are after me, it took me a long time. And why? Because I was infatuated with reading. I had to know everything. I couldn't leave a page unturned, and I couldn't even skim. I was reading word for word everything I could. Then what happened was my writing became verbose. Each chapter was 20 plus pages that I was submitting, single spaced. My analysis chapter was 67 single spaced pages. And my supervisor, Shal Rubinson, was, I think he was ready to retire earlier than he did, because, you know, he was just like, oh my God, you're writing way too much. You have to get it down a little bit. And again, during all this, my life was busy. I had another job change where I went into an AVP role for 3 years, kids, everything else. So at this point, don't do what I did, write instead. Don't read, write. Okay. Then the defense came. I had to take my lead from the supervisor. I sent this beautiful Prezi to him. I was so proud of myself. I thought it was going to be amazing. And he said, no, keep it simple. That's too much. We don't want that. I'm traditional. Keep it simple. So I came up with a simple PowerPoint, and he told me to practice, which I did. But oh no, there I was, some reading some more. Just kidding. I wasn't. I was practicing at this time. They told me I had 15 to 20 minutes, but then keep it to 15 minutes, which I had it down to 15 minutes, but at the actual defense, it took me 29 minutes. So where does all this go? My word of advice for you is just to write. Life is going to happen every single day. Breathe, take one day at a time, carry a notebook or a scratch pad, as Claudius mentioned, and write. Put your ideas down, your thoughts. Remember, it's your journey. So take self-care and write. Don't focus on what other people are doing. Don't compare yourself to others. Just write, and keep focused on what you're doing. Like me, do not try to read every single thing about the topic, or you're going to be buried, which is what I was. Schedule some time to write. If it's like 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, an hour, whatever you can, even if you just get a little bit done, it's really important to do that. Maintain some balance. Time away from your studies is healthy, but it also helps you reflect and get energized for the next time you sit down. So do some fun things as well. Claudius mentioned this. Connect with your peers, have some writing dates or some times you can talk, reflect, engage in conversation. They don't necessarily need to be peers in your cohort, but sometimes that's helpful too, because you're kind of in the same spot in terms of your process, or close spot. Write every single day. That's when it's the process of writing where you get the epiphanies. It's not the process of reading. The reading it's there and you can kind of connect stuff, but as you write, it's the process from getting it out of your head and onto the paper where you start to see things and consider things and think about things differently. Same with discussions, right? Just reading alone is not helpful. You have to do all the other pieces, and writing's critical. Take your supervisor's advice. I didn't really work too much with my committee. I worked mostly with my supervisor, and then we brought the committee in later on in the process. And finally, relax and enjoy the ride. It is a process. Learning's hard. It hurts. It hurts your head sometimes, but that's what learning is. And good luck with your studies. Hopefully, you'll do well at the next stage. So thanks.
We have a few minutes for questions.
I just want to say thanks to Jeannie, and you came through. You did a wonderful job at your defense. And again, this imposter syndrome, or the lack of confidence as you go along, it's much easier to turn to reading than it is to continue writing. And if I have one tiny little piece of advice when you're writing, it's never stop writing for the day on a completed sentence. Once you finish a thought, put an incomplete sentence, such as, by this I mean, then walk away from your computer. When you come back, that's enough to refresh you on what you were doing. You don't have to read the whole thing again. And it gives you a bit of momentum to start. But thank you, Jeannie.
Mm.
Any
I will-
questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I will just add as well, that happened to me as well. And I feel like it's really, if you read and then read again and again, which is easier, as you pointed out, Garnet, then you forget what you have read actually. And even if you highlight, and even if you make a few notes, if you don't write it down immediately, then it's lost. And those spontaneous thoughts are lost because they're not being captured.
Mhm.
And even if they're not perfect at the time when you're writing them, you have time to return to them and make it better. However, if you don't do it right away, then you may lose a lot of ideas.
Oh, Marianne put a good note in the chat. Use audio note on your phone to capture thoughts. And just a little secret, one of the things I do when I have to write, and I learned this when I was writing my dissertation, is I took my research question and I typed it up in 16-point font and I taped it on the bottom of my monitor. And whenever I read something and I'd want to include it in what I was writing, my research question was right in front of me. And if it didn't fit in with that research question, it didn't get included. Because reading can tend to take you away from the focus you have on your writing. It's good to get background on things, but you don't have to expand, and new ideas just pop out of the reading. And they say, why didn't I think of that? Writing is a process, it's a discipline.
We might move on to Stuart now.
Thanks, Tony. And I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for some of the day, but I had a bit of a full day. I doubt that I could be as organized as Claudius and Jeannie there, but I've got some words to say, and I've written them down, and so and for me they I suppose more personal. In terms of relationship with myself and with the people that accompanied me. So by many pushes and encouragements of the people around me, did the work and defended, I suppose, within a few days of year number 6. Which seemed miraculous at the time, and maybe just so that I add a bit of a personal or vulnerable note to it, I must say that I think I was first tempted to give up within the first 6 months of the program, and Deirdre and I took a little walk on one of the institute weekends, and as a result of that, I had a confirmed diagnosis as having ADHD, and as soon as that was treated, it sounds like a crazy thing to say when you've been through a master's program and taught others for most of your life, but it was true for me that once that was diagnosed, I saw life and learning in a whole nother way altogether. I kind of knew that was a possibility, but I didn't know what was on the other side of that. So it was miraculous in a way. It felt miraculous for me. I could not remember one page of reading without reading it 13 times. So that gives you a picture. Anyway, so that was a good beginning. I just made 9 points, and the first was for me, as a person in a busy job, as most of us are, is, where could I use my time? What, in other words, in what places could I use time that I hadn't used it creatively before? and where could I read and think and write? And I travel because I have a national job. Well, I did until COVID time, and so I used to make a commitment to myself to at least take one way of the trip to Ontario, which I would be doing at least once a month, and to all other provinces at least once or twice a month. At least one of those 5-hour times was for nothing else except reading and writing, and I couldn't be reached. So that was really great. And then using that as an excuse for when I'm working in other places, say, oh no, I couldn't possibly go out tonight, or I couldn't possibly do this or that with this team or that team, because I need to, I need to study. And so that was a nice excuse to be able to use. But the other place that I found very valuable for me was as often as I could to be in the academic environment. So for me, it just made a huge difference when I could be on campus in a room that I'd booked for myself, or in a library or whatever. It just made a huge difference for me to say, oh wow, there's people here. I started my program when my youngest son was doing I think the final year of his undergrad degree. So that was that was great fun. But I enjoyed the atmosphere. The second was that was, I think, just to take notice of the nature of the job that we do, because I mean, there's something about being invited into a program like this, because you are in as Garnet said a long time ago to me, in an interesting kind of practice yourself. And so that makes a huge difference. And if in our cohort we moan about anything, and if we ever did moan about anything, it was, where's their time at work, as it were. So I really think that one needs to question very carefully the nature of the job that one does for this duration of this time, because it's I don't know, especially for us, most of us were senior positions in our work, and that just meant that we held that responsibility. But it also had some good spin-offs. The other was that flexibility at work for time, and for time to write and time to be off. And if there's one thing that I think we have thought was really important, that means our cohort, it was is your work flexible enough to be able to say, I might be in the building in those days, if you were in the building, whatever the building was, but I'm in another room and I'm not available because I've booked that time to do this. And does your work allow you that? And if it doesn't, well, then it doesn't. But if it does, certainly in my workplace, people didn't ever question that. So that was pretty valuable for me. And to because I had the luxury of doing it, to book a meeting room and just say, that's it, that's where I am, and I'm not available to anyone. But I also think there's something about negotiation up front with one's employers if you're doing a study program like this, because my employees really encouraged me. They were amazing the way they encouraged me. And if ever I said to my boss, well, I'm just not keeping up, he said, well, do what you need to do. And if I do not see an out of office notice on your email, then I am going to speak to you about it. So that was pretty nice to have that support. But I guess I could, because I plan my own program. The other thing that occurred to me was really the motivation that came from my supervisor and committee. I had a committee of 3, and they were chosen but as for a very specific reason. At least I thought they were, apart from the fact that they knew what they were talking about. But for me, they were interesting people who inspired me. Only one of them taught me in the coursework, but I grew to know another because they came in and taught other courses after we began. And so there were interests that we held in common, and those interests I knew were foremost in their minds when they were thinking about me. And so I guess after a while, I really did grow to believe that when they said to me, well, you know, in your work, mine, you mean me? I grew to believe that when they spoke about your work, meaning Stuart's work, they actually meant it. First, I thought that was just sort of an academic phrase, you know, but then I learned that actually they meant that. It was my work. So I needed to believe it and trust it. And so they were very important people for me. And in my case, there's people who were supremely interested in what I was doing. And so I met very often with my supervisor and shared interest and reading and whatever. And in the occasional times when the whole group got together to meet with me, the most fascinating thing was watching them argue with each other. And I learned a huge amount from that. The other is the interest of one's cohort and the mutual support. We were a cohort of 11 people, and somehow we, in the beginning, we spent a lot of time together, and we really did commit ourselves to each other. And still today, only 2 of us have defended, and a third about to happen now. But we keep up with everybody in that group. And even if they think they're not doing anything, we tell them they are, and we encourage one another. And then one of the most valuable things that I did, which was as one of my electives, and it was only towards the end well, in the last year, 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe 2 years, was I did a course on writing. And I learned the value of excellent writing as a necessary skill. I always thought that, well, I could write, but really, I thought my writing was appalling when I looked at it afterwards. So the value of writing, and I did a very simple, what I thought was a simply put together course on writing with my supervisor, and it was totally life-changing for me. And I mean that it was, I discovered a love for writing that I never knew existed. And so I started getting excited every time I was going to write. So that was great. Then second last was the only tool that I think that I would pass on to somebody is that I have on my desktop, and I still do today, and I use one computer at work and at home, one laptop, is I have an icon with a vocabulary list, a vocab list on it. And anytime I didn't understand some word, I would, and that stayed open for me at work and at home. It was there all the time. And so learning what words meant, and it was quite an inspiration for me. And I also kept open a current bibliography or reference. The last thing I thought was important for me was what I call the prospective element, which was there, but my supervisors reminded me about it towards the end. And that was my own excitement for further research inquiry. I think if there was one thing that made me excited about what I did in this program, it was that when I got to the end, I was really very excited for what I could do next. And I think at least my supervisor looked and said, "It's not so normal, you know." Are you okay? But I think it was inspiring. And so I said to myself, why? And I said, well, am I discovering myself as I write? And I was discovering new aspects about myself as I wrote. And so I got very excited about what I needed to do and wanted to do as research after graduation. So maybe do I see this doctorate as a beginning or an end? And for me, it is definitely not an end. So do I think I'm done? No, no, I think I'm just beginning. So that was for me.
Thank you, Stuart. Well done. Yeah, no, we'll look forward to hearing more from you as we go along. Now that you've found yourself, we'll up the expectations. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to suggest questions now because I want to give time for Marion to get in, and we'll forego a few minutes in our summary at the end of this, but I want to give Marion a chance to talk about her experience.
Thank you, Garnet. Am I sharing the screen correctly there?
You are.
Yes, okay. Start my timer too. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge I'm coming today from the unceded traditional territory of the Tinamook peoples here in Nanaimo. And I thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit of my own experience. Maybe a bit of a tip. What you're going to see in this whole presentation is morphed different iterations of what I guess was my defense presentation. So maybe there's another little tip. It's kind of a style or format I started with my comps, and I'm still kind of continuing it today. In using a Gadamerian philosophical hermeneutic framework to describe my EdD completion experience, I'm also sharing with you a couple of emotions that I have experienced through the journey. But wait a minute. Oh, there it is. Okay. So to begin, my horizon of understanding, or the range of vision that includes everything that can be seen from a particular vantage point, Gadamer, to actually complete my doctorate was pretty much WTF. My historical conditioning, the way in which the event or work was previously understood, Warnke 1987, for understanding the doctoral completion process was based on my previous EdD coursework and to a minor degree, my previous MA journey. But really, these assumptions and expectations that provide our initial orientation to that which we are trying to understand, Warnke, were not enough. As such, the doctoral completion process was an Erfahrung experience, which with its defining quality of not confirmation of expectations, but precisely disconfirmation, Higgins 2010. As Gadamer notes, Erfahrung experiences are often uncomfortable as they make us feel that we are being pulled up short. So, how did I make sense of the experience and shift my understanding so I could, in fact, finish my dissertation journey and graduate? So once again, drawing on Gadamer, I engaged in dialogue, as it is only in conversation, only in confrontation with another's thought, that we can hope to get beyond the limits of our present horizon. But I note the dialogue I'm referring to here is the kind, quote, in which there can be genuine mutual participation and where reciprocal wooing and persuasion can prevail. So for me, the completion process involved forming a system of core buddies around me, people who could help me shift my horizon of understanding from what the heck have I got myself into and how the hell was I going to finish this, to one of success, pride, and accomplishment. So to give you a little bit of background, because context matters, my EdD background was I'm part of the 2011 cohort with Jeannie, so awesome to see Jeannie here. And I was chuckling a little bit listening to you, Jeannie, because all those things you were talking about, I was experienced many of those together with you. I did graduate in November 2016, and my dissertation title, after revisions and all of that, ended up being the matter of experience, understanding good teaching and international field placement. And both Jeannie and I were part of a VIU cohort within a cohort. So that in itself was actually really quite helpful as well. I was new to VIU at the time, and my network of colleagues I have made as a result of this program is still very strong today. So my current professional practice, I'm in the Faculty of Education at VIU. I'm now a professor and chair of graduate programs. So I wasn't able to come this morning. I wish I could have, but I was working with my master's students. And so part of my passion, you know, I'm very interested in balancing techno-rational and ethical action. I can thank David Coulter for that in my work with initial teacher education, and as well international field placements when we get to have them is another key passion of mine, and something that I explored in my dissertation. So part of my cohort was really super helpful in actually helping me figure out this process of figure out what it is that I could focus on. Lots of ideas. We had lots of ferry rides back and forth from Nanaimo to Vancouver, lots of conversation time. Those were key elements that did help with this success. So some other key points there from hindering and helping pieces. So hindering, I think we've mentioned lots of these already, the self-doubt, the comparing myself to others. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing, being unsure. Part of it also avoiding some of those policy and process pieces that inform and shape the whole doctoral process. Not advocating for myself, maybe that connecting a little bit to the self-doubt piece, that maybe feeling I don't have a right to speak up for myself, that kind of perspective. Also, as a mom, I will never forget this. Jeannie, when we first met in the cafeteria at VIU, my kids, I think, were 5 and 8 at the time when I started. And Jeannie said, wow, your kids are so young. Maybe you should wait till later. I'm in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't wait till later, because things are way busier when they're teenagers and you can't just distract them for 5 minutes with an iPad or anything. You need to be awake at 1 in the morning for them. And then of course, chores and tea. This became kind of a running theme in our cohort. It's nothing like, oh, let me just unload the dishwasher before I have to sit down and do this task or X, Y, Z, and making lots of cups of tea, which I do in my UBC mug. So some helping things, I had a very balanced committee. So David Coulter and Anthony Clark were key members. And then Rachel Mall was another member of my dissertation committee. I had one of my members, I felt very comfortable asking questions around when I wanted answers to my WTF questions. I didn't really necessarily phrase them that way when I was chatting to David, but I had another member that would really help me with that. I did actually, as we started finishing up the coursework, engage much more with the policy and the processes and the piece. I familiarized myself with all those different pieces and just didn't expect that my committee members would be sharing all that information with me. Definitely the cohort model, my VIU community, so building that structure around you, super, super helpful. Writing space, everybody's alluded to these points, but for me, I needed quiet space to write. I spent lots of time at my parents' house with the kids, my husband looking after my kids. So creating whichever way, shape, or form you can do that focused, designated time for you to be able to write and think and reflect. I'm putting there a little joke about the Fitbit because in the end, I actually used my Fitbit to see how many steps I was not walking, because if I was not walking, that meant I was sitting down and writing. This became particularly important as I was heading at the crunch line to submit my document for the external review team. And of course, the buddy system. And I think I would talk a little bit more about that because I took a slightly different approach to this. So in my buddies, I had various different buddies around me that were really super helpful, including my own family. And I do very much recognize now when I'm talking to graduate students or students embarking on graduate studies, there needs to be heart and mind alignment in many different ways for this to be success. So Stuart, I really resonated with you around that, you know, having that flexibility even in your work to support you through this. So my key buddy was, one key buddy was one of my cohort members. There she is, Sharon. And what we decided to do was we made a pact. We made a pact with each other to say, we're going to cross the stage together in November 2016. And we worked backwards from there. So literally, it was the July before I submitted my paper for external review. That to me is such a huge deadline that I don't know if we've mentioned it as much, but getting that paper done to its final stage with all the UBC processes and all those little ticky box things you need to do was huge. And I won't kid you, it was pretty stressful. But I worked a year before that and I sat down exactly 12 months before that and said, right, I opened a document on my laptop. This is the final paper of what it's going to be. And in the end, it was, after, of course, lots and lots of editing. But with my buddy system and working with Sharon, what we did was we had more, I don't want to say weekly check-ins, but at least once a month, maybe once every 3 weeks or so, we had a check-in with each other. It sort of helped keep us on track because once the coursework's over, how is it that you're going to stay on track and be accountable for somebody else? And even having those opportunities to chat, or even if it's like, you know, hey, this week has not been very good for me at all. we had kind of created this system. Actually, now that I'm talking, Jeannie, I do remember, this is all starting to blur away. We did have a sort of a monthly check-in that we used to do with our buddies, with our VIU cohort, and we would kind of alternate homes around Vancouver Island, and we would have this monthly check-in where the talking prompt was, this month I've mostly been, and we had to articulate out loud what it is that we've been doing, what is it that we've been thinking. And it was a way to get outside of our heads, or as my husband would say, to stop farting around inside the head and get out publicly what it is where we were with our thoughts, our reading, and our progress. So in the pact that Sharon and I made, we both attended each other's defenses, which literally happened on a Friday, and then hers was on the Monday. And again, it just championed each other through the process to the finish line. So in closing, the EdD completion experience brought me back to the purpose of the program. Wait a minute, what's going on here now? Here we go, yes. You are a leader in your own education and your learning. So be the leader, you will get there. And yes, enjoy it. Yes, this will be fun. Engage in the policy that informs the traditions that is the EdD dissertation writing and completion journey. Oh, I also have a little handout I put together. I will say, as Claudius, it was just completely, it's a Marianism. It is not at all vetted and approved by UBC, but I'll put that in the chat in a second. But ultimately, in preparation for completing your EdD journey, it is a little bit all about you, or as my husband would say, the princess in me. So I would say, surround yourself with support for those who will help champion you to the end. You can do this. And that is the end of my little presentation. Questions, and there's my 2011 cohort members that are so important in this. And we even have a cohort mascot. His name is Aristotle. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Marion. I'll turn it over to Tony now. Tony, you're muted.
Just unmuted myself. Thank you, everybody. Let's go with some wrap-up questions before I move into some sort of a plenary statement. So there's been plenty of support and notes in the chat, but I think it's good timing to capture your thinking about, 3, 4 very thoughtful, insightful accounts of the experience that some of you are only partway into. So let's hear some of that rich dialogue.
Thank you very much to all panelists for excellent tips, advice, recap of all the hindrances. It's been very helpful. Can I have just a very uninspiring question, let's put it this way, but it's something that I will be dealing with quickly, quite soon, which is BREP. How long should I expect for BREP to take from the moment that I have fulfilled the application? So it's very practical, I guess.
Can I just suggest that research ethics can take up to about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So, it depends how often the committee meets. And unfortunately, because of COVID, this is all done online now. So it's just dependent on them. So usually recommend about 6 weeks, Natalia.
Thank you, Garnet. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and it depends on how clearly you wrote if you went through everything methodically and you crossed every T and dotted every I, it makes it easier for them. But if you have to go through multiple institutions, it'll sort of cascade, right? So that's a consideration as well.
Mine should be very simple because it doesn't have any vulnerable groups, any special configurations or so. Thank you.
Victoria's just posted in the chat that it was really quick turnaround for her. She heard back in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
So maybe they're back together meeting again now and they're processing the files they need to do.
Yeah, maybe like me, they needed more motivation and now they got it. Thank you. That's encouraging.
Any other specific statements or responses?
My question to those of you that are here now that are in the process, do you see yourself in any of the presentations that were here? Are you at any one of the stages? Do you have any one of the distractions that they're mentioning? You don't need to raise your hand or anything. I just want you to think about it. If you are, hopefully some of the suggestions they've presented can help you, recognize that you're not alone in this. You're not the only one that has these. Everyone goes through this, and you will come out the other side.
I'd just like to make a comment of somebody who's sort of in it right now. And a lot has been said about writing every day and the importance of doing so. But since COVID and living on a computer and Zoom meetings, I can't do it. The end of the day, I cannot look at another screen. And so it's a really interesting space to try to navigate writing and keeping motivated and doing things every day when you're just so burnt out from screen time. So I think that that's something that, for those of us in it right now, some of the recommendations around, taking walks and those times to kind of think is really helpful for getting away from the screen so that you can kind of go back into it. I don't know what other people are finding or if there's any sort of tips or strategies that are working for people, but I know that's a hard place to be.
You're getting a lot of agreement in the chats. Others are feeling the same thing. You're in a unique period and a unique time that you're inundated. You're constantly focused on your computer screen and you need time away from it. And that can be thinking time. Stuart, you have a question or a comment, I'm sorry.
Let me get a comment, Victoria, to say that one of my committee did a very important thing for me at one point, and I remember it was when I was actually trying to formulate what I was going to write about. So it was after comps, and he said to me, I want you to write by hand with a pencil one page of one-page summary of what you're thinking about. And that became quite a practice for me. I generally write with a pencil on paper, but just to do that, uses another side of the brain altogether and does something pretty amazing. And then to summarize some of what you're trying to say in your own handwriting, it was a very valuable exercise, and it does something incredible to relax the brain.
Claudius, I see, has his hand up.
Yeah, I agree completely. I spend most of my day at a computer and most of my evening at a computer teaching. So I fully commiserate with that. And so one of the things I would suggest then is, instead of writing about it, talk about it. Talk about it to your cat, your friend, whoever's going to listen to you. Because as you talk about it, that sort of helps you clarify. And then it's still keeping it in your brain. So that's one thing to avoid: looking at a screen and just talking to another human being or to the wall or yourself.
I think something that people have raised on the periphery is place and space for purpose. And for me, being in Vancouver towards the end of my PhD, things would get knotted up, and a long walk in Pacific Spirit Park, where I focused on just one problematic. I may not have addressed it properly, but at least I untangled it, and I found that really significant. And I think finding a place that is purposeful and peaceful has really great results in terms of you having clarity. And I think that's the trouble at the moment, is we have a lot of white noise and we have a lot of screen time, and there's no time for actually clear thinking and untangling things, let alone trying to come up with a response necessarily. So I think that's important, and I think people have actually hinted at that being significant. You know, come in, close the door, or open the door when it's needed. I think that's an important thing. Thank you. I think that's a good time, unless there's any other burning questions, to try and tie things up a little bit, or not unwrap things more than wrap things up. But I put in the running sheet that in terms of the plenary session, sorry, I'm not looking at you in the eye, I'm looking at the screen, but thinking on the significance of this day, and I referenced it to going forward with intention and expectations. And I think that's important, is that when anything is like a retreat, what will be the product or the result in an interpersonal sort of, or interpersonal aspect of it? You know, what's going to motivate you to actually go away this afternoon and set out something for you, whether you write or whether you start to develop some rationales that are going to work for you. Well, I want to go back, as a plenary does, and look at some key points. And my Twitter handle descriptor has something referencing bumper sticker statements, and so I try to keep these brief and on point with. And so with Michelle, writing was always to find out how and what I didn't know before. We've heard this quite a bit. It's the celebration of exploration of who you are and the voice that you're finding. How an individual works within structures, I think, was an important thing that she talked about. And in recent presentations by the last four speakers, you know, don't be going writing in restrictive structures for yourself. There's enough of that going on by other people. If you're going to break the rules, at least know what they are. I think is an important one of the liberation that can come from writing, and the freeing up, rather than getting tied down with how many words or how many pages have I written, and when am I going to get this done by. I kind of like this, and I think we need to take it on board, is becoming an academic as an opportunity to slow down and think about what I want to be in the world. I might even move on and not deal with anything else, because I think that's one of the most significant aspects that we can look at, is the whole point of you starting out in this journey, the whole point of you actually knowing that you have a significant amount of reading, not too much though, and a large amount of writing, but also a large amount of thinking that is represented in that writing. And I think that's something that we should embrace and recognise within ourselves, of the very purpose of engaging in this process. And sometimes that gets forgotten. I often say in doctoral studies that it's another form of learning, and yet people get so caught up in navigating the hurdles and the barriers, etc. We forget about that we're supposed to be learning along the way. So I think there should be times for celebrating that. I'm skipping over and cognizant of the time, because I want some of you to be wrapping some of this up. So figuring out what I see as productive, and being about articulating my presence in writing, which I'm going over. These are words paraphrased in some part by Michelle. There was no such thing as a perfect dissertation. That is one bumper sticker or t-shirt, folks, you should be purchasing. I think that's important. The other t-shirt that I always wanted to produce was, if you cared about the PhD, you really wouldn't ask. So I think that you need to have a support crew that know when to back off and not bug you about it, or when to just go, I'm taking the kids for a drive, I'll leave you to do the reading and writing. Claudia really looked at the how approach to it, and I think there's enough in what she said that helps you to think about the process, but also never lose sight of the, you know, why is this process in place? What's the purpose of it? And distinguishing between the literature review and how that's informing you, to then look at your empowering you to go forward in terms of your theoretical stance. And I think a number of the folks that I've spoken to recently in the 2020 cohort are coming away from their most recent course, clearly starting to understand how I'll do the research, and some of that's going to inform what they're going to research. So I think that's quite, some of the points that Claudia raised are going to be quite poignant for that particular cohort in particular. Could not put enough particulars in that sentence, Carmen. And with Deirdre, writing as an integral part of analysis, I think that should stay with you quite a bit. The one thing that stayed with me from that presentation and will stay with me is I am a field note, one source of the data, and the subjective is important here. Understanding that you are the author of this this paper, this dissertation, and as such, so much of you is going into that. And I think it would be befitting of all of us to consider subjectivity at how it plays into the data and the way that you tell your story and present your findings as such. And I also like the fact that Deirdre made comments about the stages of confidence in your writing. I think that's a natural understanding. I think there are plenty of people in the program and alumni who readily still go to using the phrase imposter syndrome. Sooner or later, there's going to be enough imposter syndrome folk that will stop saying that, because it's recognised that we're all on the same page here. And I think that level of confidence comes from the support of others, whether that be your supervisor, your committee, or your colleagues, peers in your cohort. And I think that was borne out today by the four panel presenters who spoke about the importance of engaging in dialogue and sharing in the experiences as a way of supporting you to feel confident in thinking the way you are and standing on the shoulders of others and finding your own voice. So I think I'll leave it at that, but I'm opening it up to what others might like to contribute to some of their takeaways from today. Thank you. I do teach a BEd class, so I'm used to this silence.
What I'm finding though is that beyond, like, say 10 people on Zoom, it no longer works to kind of stare, people down. Like, I used to kind of slowly get closer and closer to the camera, and then I could get somebody to say something, but we have too many people for that technique to work. So I don't know.
It still works, Deirdre. One little comment to follow up on what Tony was saying. And it's been really interesting because every one of us have gone through this idea of the imposter syndrome. Should I really be here? For any of you that are in the program that are working now, remember one thing. The admissions committee chose you to be part of your cohort. They went through all the applications that came in. They looked at the qualifications, the capabilities of everyone else, and they chose you to be part of your cohort. So let that be part of your confidence as you go through. Smile, Henry, shake your head.
Thank you so much, everybody, for all the presenters today. It's fabulous. So many of those ideas, certainly, I think I certainly speak from my cohort. We certainly talk a lot together, and a lot of the great advice that was provided. I think we're doing parts of that, but I think it's always nice to be reminded of that it's a process, and that, yes, there is a final destination, but we need to also enjoy that. And that's something that I know this last year during the pandemic, I've really tried to slow things down, is to enjoy where I am. And I can't thank Michelle enough for helping me realize that, and just to not be so hard on myself. And the imposter syndrome, which was mentioned, if there's a bit of what I'm trying to unpack too. And but it's really nice to have this community here. And I think that just really speaks to the power of our group here. And it's just fantastic to see everybody here and to be able to support each other. So that's all I want to say. So thank you.
I just wanted to note that I think that that's actually also one of the challenges, is that for me anyways, is working in a higher level position, but then every day coming into my PhD, and I'm confident in my regular role, and then I come into my PhD and I feel like an infant. Like I feel like I don't know anything.
Yeah.
I remember when I was doing my doctorate, I was working full time as well, and just the switch of the brain switch of going from a policy position where writing quickly is valued, and then in academia, the last thing a prof wants to hear is, "Hey, I write quickly." It's like, would like you to think, and that can be a slow process. So just the switch, like having to do that switch and getting completely confused and writing things in government that quoted Foucault, and a minister saying you're in the wrong place right now, and in university writing something that sounded like a press release. So I think it is a real challenge when you're working, but it can be a time to reflect on your practice too. That's what I found so valuable about grad school. It's a time to just step back and say, why am I doing the things that move so quickly and work, and to be able to step back and think about it when I didn't have time to do that at work.
One thing that is not often spoken about is the editing process that goes on. And because my PhD was based in Australia, we write 100,000 words. I feel like I wrote probably 30 to 50% more than that. And the amount of rubbish I had to cut out, but reading through the rubbish was really quite an interesting thing, because it was almost a way of measuring my growth over the period of time and going, I can't believe that I thought that at a particular time. It was really quite naive, but it still had a place because that was my stepping off point. And so, like I mentioned, it's clearly that I was writing myself into it as much as my subjectivity as well. But somewhere down the track, people start talking to you about editing as well. So you start off thinking, I will never get 100,000 words. And then you go, how do I get it down from 113,000 words to 100? Turns out I just smied it through. 105,000 would look like 100,000. But I think that's an interesting part of the process for those who get towards their dissertation as well. But even on a daily basis of a stream of consciousness and then trimming a page down to a paragraph or a sentence is an important part of the process, I think. Okay,
Yep.
Are you all ready to write? Do you want to leave it to you?
What was that, Tony?
I thought you were just going to say a few things. I thought I'd leave it to you to wrap up and.
Sorry, I was writing down session for writing retreat next year, editing. I think that's a great topic. And Natalia, you had your hand up. So if you have a quick comment, and then we will wrap up, because I don't want to intrude on the rest of your day. Yeah, Natalia.
It was a quick question, actually. If you have met with someone who would have worked a long time, like myself, on theoretical framework and proposal, and then swam nicely and smoothly throughout analysis and, data collection and analysis, or should I really expect it to take much, much longer, like most of the people?
Well, I think the more work and thought you put in early on, the smoother things go later. Absolutely. If but we also get clarity as we go along. It's really more the rule than the exception, that your research question gets clarified and even rather dramatically edited toward the end of the process. And that's just part of it. But I think the more work you put in early, the smoother it's going to go. But no guarantees.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating here today. This is an annual event. So if you have ideas for things that you'd like to see next year, let Tony and me know, or Michelle's coming in pretty soon to take over as chair of the EDD program. So yes, thank you so much, and hope you have a beautiful rest of the day.
Bye.